Hello, everyone. My name is Cislina Grosser Ledbetter, and I'm Executive Director of Counseling, Health and Wellness at Western Washington University. And I am excited today to have a conversation that I have been dying to have with someone who has become not just a colleague, but kind of a fast friend. When you text someone as you're standing in the middle of a rally, that person qualifies as a fast friend. This
Okay.
is Dr. Keith Williams, and I call him Chief. He's the assistant chief of police at Western Washington University. He has been the assistant chief here for the past 2 years, and in law enforcement, however, for 33 years. I know he started when he was just 5, and so that youth that you see, don't be deceived. He started when he right out of the crib.
Yeah.
And Chief came to us, Assistant Chief came to us from Kinloch, Missouri. He was the police chief there, and Kinloch, Missouri, I think is. I think it's reminiscent for me when you say Missouri, because I know that you were not too far from Michael Brown's, the town where Michael Brown was killed
Yeah.
by police. And so Assistant Chief Williams, tell me a little bit about sort of your decision to become a cop.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ledbetter. I appreciate your wonderful intro. And I also see you more than a colleague, but
Yeah.
my, yeah, we know. Okay. We'll leave it at that.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway,
They know.
yeah, I've had a long career in law enforcement, a little over 33 years. It's hard pressed that it happened. I guess for the most part, I was the innocent victim, if you will, of various types of police misconduct, which is
Mm,
why I became a policeman. I have 4 specific incidents in my life
mm.
prior to becoming a policeman when law enforcement wanted to kill me. Had their weapons on me. I don't mean just a traffic stop and cops got his hand on his gun. I mean, had pistols on me, shotguns on me, rifles on me
Wow.
because I existed. The first event happened in Missouri, and the other 3 happened when I lived out in Los Angeles. So I guess for me, I always believed that if there was going to be some type of change in my perspective, if I was going to be involved in that change, it's going to have to be from the inside. So
Mm,
that meant I was going to have to learn to become a policeman. What that meant, how it affects communities, and what it means to me. I have 3 sons. Ironically, my oldest is a detective sergeant with the Cleveland Police Department. That's a whole nother story because I had no idea after he got his degree. He was calling me his daddy. I'm joining the police academy. Wow, where'd that come from?
oh my
But
goodness.
it is, well, it's one of
Y-
those situations, and
Yeah.
I support them and I wish them nothing but the best. But for
Hmm.
me, as I said, it was the result of seeing firsthand how abusive police can be with someone who's done nothing,
Mm.
just walking down the street or riding in a car with a friend, and then you get pulled out and weapons on you and called racial epithets, and it just really impacted me significantly. And I think because of that is what brought me here today,
Yeah.
and which, unknown to me at the time, kind of directed my passion for rebuilding those relationships between police and the communities we serve, because I saw firsthand how being abusive, excessive, and not totally understanding and using your power for good can be a negative influence in the community. So
Mm.
that's kind of my story as I
Yeah.
started in this.
Yeah. So speaking of using your power for good, you actually obtained your PhD in sociology, and you call, police work an experiment. Based on where we are today, good
Wow.
doctor, what would you say about this experiment that you have been participating in over the
Wow.
past 33 years?
You You come with straight home runs, Dr. Ledbetter, I tell you. I guess when you've been on both sides of
Yeah.
the equation, it gives you perspective. And don't get me wrong, I've seen a lot of good police officers do good work, do good things, people who, like they say in bands of brothers, we support each other. We support the
Mhm.
person on the left, the person on the right, and we do our job. But at the end of the day, our role is to make sure our communities are safe and secure. I jokingly say, as a sociologist, that was my laboratory
Yeah.
because, and I know psychology is more your
Yeah.
forte, but we share those social science
Yep.
background. And anytime you have an opportunity to really observe how behavior impacts communities, impacts the behavior of officers, it drives you. I was
Mm.
just able to document it and observe and then report my observations. I spent the beginning part of my career with the St. Louis Police Department. And, when you go through that police academy, it's sort of kind of like a boot camp per se, only you get to go home at the end of the day and come back the next morning.
Yeah.
But it's very much paramilitary driven, the hierarchy of chain of command and understanding things. But one thing that is always embedded in
Mhm.
that young officer is that you are joining a group that demands your allegiance. It
Mm.
demands that when challenged, you circle the wagons and you protect one another. And on the surface, that may sound kind of like a good thing, but when you look at it from a much deeper perspective, when circling those wagons means no longer you will have transparency or you will not tell the absolute truth, that's a problem. Two things I've always pushed for as a policeman is transparency and accountability. When you remove those from police work, you are doing nothing but looking for opportunities for issues because people take advantage of these situations.
Mm.
So for me, having the opportunity to deal with a variety of situations, I think as a young police officer, once you graduate from the academy, you do 12 weeks on field training. And
Mhm.
within that 12 weeks of field training, I might have been involved with directly or indirectly, maybe 7 or 8 homicide investigations, 7 or 8 search warrants for narcotics. I mean, a lot of high profile activity. You have to hit the ground running. I know a lot of officers who work in other areas may not even see that much activity within their first 10 years. In St. Louis City, you saw it right out the gate, but there's an indoctrination process. And that
Mm.
indoctrination process demands your allegiance. I can remember when I graduated from the police academy, I was always fascinated with defensive tactics,
Mm.
which is, for lack of a better word, empty hand control for police officers when confronted by violence, how you neutralize it, everything up until the use of your firearm. Everything before that, that's what defensive
Okay.
tactics is. So I was so impressed by the things I saw and what it could do. I knew I wanted to be an instructor. So after about
Mm.
3 years on the street, I was detached periodically to the academy to teach. They sent me to the FBI school to be trained and then to take that training and provide it for the officers. Because early in my career, you might remember a gentleman named Rodney King.
I do.
And it was the Rodney King. I had just taught a baton class, a nightstick class that day. So it was just ironic when I looked at that video and I saw what was happening to Mr. King and the officer's response and how powerful that video camera was. And we see that more today. So all in all, I think that although I think policing is necessary in this
Yeah.
society, we have a lot of work to do to clean it
Yeah.
up.
And speaking of a lot of work to do, I mean, you referenced Rodney King, and I think in more recent times, I'm thinking about St. Louis, Missouri, where you used to work.
Mhm.
Um, and you were around and very close during that time of Michael Brown. What was being right there, front and center, like for a Black police officer?
Well, to be honest with you, Dr. Ledbetter, it was a challenge because more often than not, a Black police officer faces two challenges right out the gate. You have the challenges of being a police officer and all that entails that, but there's also a challenge from members of the community who see you as selling them out. who see you as someone who no longer represents their interests, but you represent the interests of the man. And because of that, it creates a certain type of duality. And you have to be strong to navigate that. At the time of Mike Brown, yes, I can remember it. They say some things happen and just timestamps in your brain. Well, that's one of them. Because Kinloch sits right next to Ferguson, Missouri, where this happened. And I'm not going to give you an in-depth
Sure.
background on Ferguson, but I'm just going to say it wasn't a very friendly place for Black people for many years.
Mm.
They drove a lot of their revenue through excessive tickets for people of color, and the way that they treated individuals when they were making arrests or doing stops was pretty brutal. Which is why after Mike Brown and the FBI came in and a variety of other measures were taken, they quickly knew that they had to make changes there, and a consent decree had to come down to take over the operation of that department. And it's only because of some systemic issues that had been allowed to go on unchecked for too long. And then after the shooting of Mike Brown, to just leave his body
Yeah.
in the street like that for
Yeah.
so long
Yeah.
just really was amazing. And one thing I've never to this day been able to figure out is that after the incident, that department collected all cell phones from anybody in that area. And to this day, I have no idea what was revealed on those phones. So I can't say if it was something that would have changed the outcome. But for me, as a policeman, we're just naturally suspicious. Caught my attention, and I was running.
Mm.
So that
Wow.
really opened up the door. When you talk about Mike Brown, that just fast forwards us to George Floyd,
It
which
fast forwards us to
yeah,
George
which
Floyd.
was me, was another situation. I mean, we can name a list of unarmed Black males who were shot and killed by the police. And it's unfortunate for the families, it's unfortunate for the communities. And I've told you before, for me, it took me right back to the slave issue of buck breaking, which
Right.
was that process of taking the strong slave, tying him to the ground, and the master would rape the
Yeah.
individual in front of his family, in front of his community, to degrade him, humiliate him to the point that his value began to become decreased. And when I saw George Floyd and how the officer was engaging and keeping his knee on his neck, it just took me there.
Wow.
And it's unfortunate. So
Wow.
we have to stop that behavior.
Yeah.
We have to hold
Yeah.
each other accountable.
Absolutely. And you talked about buck breaking, and you also are an avid teacher, and really believe in experiential learning. And one of the and so you've written a book, and you'll have to we'll share it with our viewers afterwards, because I don't remember. I have read it, but the title kind of escapes me. I don't
The
have it in
broken
front.
badge.
The Broken Badge.
Mhm.
So we will share information about that in our notes. But when you think about where we are now, wonder there are calls and cries to defund the police. Talk to me about how you feel about that when you hear that.
Well, I guess on the surface, it does create a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
You have to, because we're looking for a greater explanation. I certainly believe that if I received a call for homeless people congregating, maybe a disturbance or someone suffering a behavioral health crisis, that there are individuals who possess greater skill sets than we have collectively as police officers. And if there was a way for them to be involved directly, indirectly, it would certainly free up a lot of the resources that police officers use. So when you talk about bringing in additional resources that can help the community in a more positive way, such as the examples I mentioned, I'm all for it. But to take a broad brush and say every police department, we're going to cut your budget
Yeah.
30%,
Right.
40%.
Right.
I don't think that personally, I don't think that's the right approach. I think you have to really examine what's going on. You have to look at that department. Look, we're on a campus, and I know you've worked on campuses as well. And I've
Mm-hmm.
worked in urban environments, which is a
Mm-hmm.
little bit different. So,
Yeah.
I guess there has to be a little bit more specifics involved when you talk about defunding. If it's about bringing in additional resources so that to make it more beneficial for the community members, support it 100%. But just to flat out say, I don't care what you're doing, 30% of your budget's gone, I don't really think that's the approach. And I think when most Americans are polled, in any community, they want to feel safe.
Right.
They want to know if there's an incident, there will be someone who will respond and will do the appropriate thing. They don't want someone come. I mean, look, there's so many videos of African Americans calling the police on others, and then they get arrested or they get shot, and they're the victim. So it's quite sad, but
yeah,
that's kind of my perspective.
Yeah. And defunding the police, I hear what you're saying. It's not necessarily the answer, but you've got some ideas about some things that might work. I know you've said that bias policing must be eliminated. What does that mean? How do we do that?
You know, I can tell you incident after incident after incident, as a young police officer, as a field training officer, as a detective, talking to other officers, it's standard practice. 3 black males in a vehicle, 4 black males in a vehicle, pull them over. Somebody's doing something wrong. They either got a gun, somebody's wanted, and if we get them out and talk to them and nobody's wanted and we run them, somebody's lying. So we got another problem. So it's just, when you just look at people on the surface, and I've talked to police officers who have told me, hey, black people are genetically predisposed to be criminals. You can't help it. You were born to be a criminal, you know? And when I hear officers just casually speaking like that, I'm offended, actually.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that we have to get some perspective on that and have to have an understanding, because you can look cross cultures. You can look at individuals in many communities. I don't know anywhere in the world, and I've traveled a little bit, where there's not crime, where there aren't people doing drugs or doing unlawful acts. So just to identify one ethnicity or black and brown people or, you know, young people without further information. I was very impressed with Washington State, which is where we are now, because there was some questionable policing done many years ago on something called the pretextual stop. And the pretextual stop allowed officers to engage individuals, pull them over if they observe a violation. So if I see individuals in a vehicle, 4 individuals in a vehicle, I think they've got a weapon, I think they've got drugs, but I have no probable cause, but they don't use their blinker when they move into the left lane, or they go through that stop sign a little too fast. Oh, that's the pretext, pull them over. You don't need probable cause. Well, Washington State said, no, you got to have probable cause. So, and this was years ago. And so I guess it's ironic that I find myself here, but I was always impressed. Wow, a state government is going up against federal government and trumping them. And I shouldn't say that, but and going up against it and doing the right thing. And I said, boy, that's just fantastic. So, and that's what we should be doing, because when you let that officer have just unlimited powers with no checks, you're creating issues that are going to come back and bite you every time.
So you've been on Western's campus for a couple of years, and as far as I recall, there's been no discharge of a weapon on Western's campus in recent memory. But you've also worked out in the non-academic world. How would you categorize the distinction? So if students are wondering, are all police the same? You got this ACAB. What would you say is the distinction between working on a college campus and out there?
Yeah, very good question. Well, number one, we have a responsibility to these students and the parents. You know, I tell my officers all the time, you know, we are surrogate parents, so to speak. You know, we're responsible. And I would want to make sure that my children were with people who took their life and value to the point that as if it was their own children. So for that aspect, I think there's a little bit more connectivity. Now, when you get to more of an urban environment, as an example, when I was with St. Louis City, I had a partner at the time for a couple of years, and we'd get to work and it might be 150 calls pending as soon as we hit the door. So, and it might be 10 officers in a squad, and each sergeant is responsible for his squad. And that means you've got 10 officers, you got 100, 150 calls, and still more calls coming in. So it's just a different pace. So oftentimes you don't have time to talk
Mm.
to everyone, to stop at the churches, to talk to the kids playing basketball, to do the things that are going, because you have to engage people where they are. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to talk to people like you would want to be talked to. Where here at this campus, and I've worked at other campuses before, you have that opportunity. You have the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to engage students, to talk to them. Hey, how are classes going? What do you want to do once you graduate? Where you from? And just have those conversations, because as I mentioned before, oftentimes much of our student population is driven by social media. That's where they get
Yes.
much of their information. If you come from
Yeah.
a place that has had adverse relationships with law enforcement, maybe you come from a Wisconsin, you come from a Kentucky, you come from a Detroit or St. Louis, whatever, and you bring that here. So when
Mm.
you see that officer in that uniform, you immediately reflect back, he's just like the officers I remember. So it's up to us to change that paradigm.
Yeah.
So every day I'm challenging my officers. We take the role. I believe in role playing. Experiential learning is just in my blood.
Yes.
So I would take the role of a disgruntled student who believes that
Mm.
officers are just representing some Nazi agenda,
Mm.
oppressive, racist. Why should I trust you, Mr. Policeman, when all you want to do is oppress me? Now go. I need your elevator speech. So every officer here, and I'm hopefully, I may be speaking out of turn, but I hope you will challenge, and the viewers will challenge. Come to our officers,
Mm.
engage in a conversation, and ask them why. You'll be surprised at what you may hear, because I believe in education, we can disarm a lot of the negativity. Policemen are taught what's called tactical communication. Some call it verbal judo. It is the ability to diffuse conflict
Yeah.
through dialogue. Same thing when addressing these issues. When you're approached and someone is disgruntled, angry, feels you're a racist, you have to be able to communicate and explain the why, articulate that. And if the more knowledge you have on the topic, the more effective you will be. So that's what I'm spending a lot of my time on. And I challenge them. You can play the role of the disgruntled student and bring it to me. And I'll also demonstrate, because I can't talk the talk if I can't
Uh,
walk the walk.
That's right. So you heard it here first, folks. Officer friendly out there. Go and go
Right.
talk to an officer if you see an officer around campus. That's
Absolutely.
really great. And you also talk about accountability.
Yeah.
How do you hold your fellow officers accountable to a standard when, there's this officer culture?
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah. Well, I
how
tell
do
you
you,
what, that's a heavy hitter there. I think if I was 100% effective in developing some type of protocols or policies or procedures,
yeah,
I might be in line for a Nobel.
that's
But
right. That's
with that
right.
being said, with that being said, we have to hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
There's too much of the circling of the wagon. And officers doing, let's go back to George Floyd. There were a couple of other
Mm,
officers there watching that go down. How many jumped in and said, "Hey, hold up, wait a minute, come on, let's get them out of here.
yeah.
Don't, come on, no, we don't need that. Come on, let's go."
Yeah.
No, they just watched as well. No,
Right.
and our policy addresses that, as do many other policies. See, a lot of people think, well, you need more training, you need more. A lot of the things, officers just aren't doing it, and they're not being
Mm,
reinforced by their supervision. And that is why they're getting away with it. And when we talk about accountability, that means we have to hold each other accountable. And when you see
absolutely.
something that you know is not right, you have to speak on it. You just
Yeah.
can't turn your back. Oh, I didn't know what was out here. A bird was flying over my head. I missed everything. No, it's not enough of that, because in the culture of police work, that had been a standard practice. You never, excuse me,
Gotcha.
ever talk about another officer who's done the wrong thing and
Mm,
bring that to the attention of supervisors. Because see, oftentimes when you do that, you're demoted, you're
mm-hmm.
transferred, and you might even be terminated. And no officer wants to go through that.
Ah, that's right. And so the sort of dovetailing that point, police who report abuse and corruption, what typically happens to them? So you want to be the officer who says this is inappropriate, or listen, don't spray this woman's wall this woman's apartment with bullets. You might hit her. You might strike her. What happens to the police officers at the Breonna Taylor incident when the 4 or 5 officers that were backup tell on the one who's actually doing the spraying?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah. Historically, you got a problem because number one, you're risking alienation from your colleagues. And for a police officer to go on a call, shots fired, fight in progress, what have you, and to know you've got no backup coming, that's beyond stressful, So it becomes problematic, but you have to do it. If we're going to change we've been talking about changing this culture for many years, but have never taken the appropriate steps collectively. I've known a lot of officers who stepped up. I mean, you hate to see a person placed in custody, put under arrest, maybe he's on the ground handcuffed, and then the officer decides, well, I'm just going to stomp him in the head a couple times just because. And then you're like, well, okay, no. We are not judge, jury, and executioner. That is not our role. And if that was a perceived role from however many years ago, it's over. And we have to have a new breed of police officer who is willing to step forward. I'm not saying we're not going to protect one another when situations demand help, but you know when you're being abusive. I mean, it's like the old adage of right from wrong.
Yes.
And as a police officer, we're held accountable. If anybody should understand somewhat of the law, you would think we are a group that would. So we know what we're supposed to do, but for the culture, see, my whole thing, Dr. Ledbetter, my focus has been to work on changing police culture. It's beyond a class here, training on this. Let's talk about that. You have to get to the source of the matter, which is police culture has not evolved since probably the 50s.
Well, the police patrol, right? And the Fugitive Slave Act. I'm not sure how much it's evolved since then. And that's those are a couple of your experiential teaching tools to be able to give people a snapshot of the history of policing. Do you think white cops know the history of policing? Do you ever have those conversations with white?
I am amazed at how much they do not know. And that's why I've chosen education as a component. Now, if I'm trying to educate you on the Fugitive Slave Act, slave catchers, even fast forward to COINTELPRO, we have those discussions under J. Edgar Hoover and some of those initiatives to eliminate these Black groups, whether they be Black Panthers, Nation of Islam, fraternities and sororities, believe it or not. So
we were targeted. What? I didn't know that.
That was all part of the mix. There could be no secret organization that the FBI didn't know something about. You're not going to have any rituals. You're not going to have any handshakes. You're not going to have anything. We want to know it all.
That.
And that was one of their motivations back in the 50s forward. The biggest movement toward change in police work, and from my research and my opinion, was when they began to try to change the cultural makeup. They said, well, we're going to hire more minorities. We're going to bring more people of color into the ranks. Well, it started off, but then it didn't change. Even in my career, I came in law enforcement in the late 80s is when I started. Yeah. And even then, I can recall going on calls and the victim would say, I want a white cop. I don't want a Black cop handling this call. I want a white cop.
Wow.
One day I was out and a Black guy confronted me. He just wanted to talk. He said, hey, I used to be a cop here back from the 50s a bit. He said, we were not allowed to arrest white people. You had to call a white officer. And I remember one time I had arrested a guy, a fugitive or something, brought him into the station. And the desk officer, the first he looked at this white guy who of a race, said, what are you doing bringing white people in? Aren't there enough Black people to lock up?
Did he say that out of his mouth?
And I'm looking at him like, now I'm a young officer, so you're trying to, not cause any waves, but I never forgot it. I never forgot that. And he wasn't kidding. So, and that's not that long ago. So these behaviors are indicative of a bigger problem.
Right.
Going back to police culture.
Yeah, it's really hard, I think, sometimes to convey how systemic it is when you start talking about culture. And so I think one of the things that sort of a mantra of mine is power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so
It
when
is.
you think about how police officers in our society have so much power, and then they're dropped into this system, right? They're in this system that says black is bad and white is right. And that implicit bias then seeps through.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what your thoughts are, but I'm curious to know. Um, First, we'll sort of finish up your fourth point that you talk about a lot, which is all investigations need to be transparent.
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
I don't know how we get to that when officers are turning off their cameras and when they're taking cell phones from the scene. How can we get to transparency?
It's not going to be easy. There's
No.
going to be a lot of pushback, but we have to persevere and
Yeah.
we have to push the moment. This is the time. And I
Mm.
believe that we have to push it. Whenever I hear of a police investigation or something going on, my ears are attuned. I want to hear the words transparency.
Okay.
We're having this investigation. We'll be transparent and we'll make sure the information comes forward. Hey, I want to hear it and I want to see it, because all too often that's not the case. Doors are closed. People are turned away. We're not going. We'll get back with you when we decide to get back with you. Internal affairs divisions are notorious for those,
Mm. I see.
because it reveals a lot of information, and I think it's important to get it out there. If you're going to improve the trust with the community, then
Yeah.
you're going to have to do these things. Now, if you have no intention of improving that relationship, then just keep doing what you're doing and things are going to get worse. But if we
Mm-hmm.
want to make things better, we have to build a relationship. Look, at the end of the day, there are far more people, private citizens, than there are police. These
Mm-hmm.
private citizens have far more weapons than the police, which is
Mm-hmm.
why in the event of an emergency, calls are made for the National Guard, because folks
Mm.
realize we are outgunned. And it's unfortunate, but it's a reality. We are a gun culture.
Yeah.
And many people have 2, 3, 4 guns at home. I'm
Yeah.
looking at a video and the people, they got this 4-year-old child out there shooting a rifle. I mean, what is that all about? Because I
Yeah.
know a gun's only purpose is to destroy, period. That's what it was designed for. And
Yeah.
so with my own children, it was education. Get away from it. If you go
Mm.
by your friend's house, hey, look at my daddy's gun, get out of there. Call me. We'll come get you. Find a
Yeah.
parent, find an adult. Not,
Yeah.
okay, let's practice shooting in the backyard,
That's exactly
4-year-old.
right.
So that's just
Yeah, I get that. I've
my,
had that conversation too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. The accountability piece is important. The
Yeah.
transparency
The
piece
trans.
is important.
Yeah.
Each one of those pieces builds on the other in order
Mm-hmm.
to bring about change. This is a very basic plan to bring about police reform, which
Yeah.
is what the conversation is about.
So I'm going to read something and I want you to respond to it.
Sure.
So this is from a Louisville Metro Police Department major. Okay.
Okay.
Do not stop, she meant stoop to their level. Do not respond to them. If we do, we only validate what they did. Don't make them important because they are not. Major Bridget Hallahan reportedly wrote in an email to her colleagues at the LMPD.
Yeah.
They will be the ones washing our cars, cashing us out at the Walmart, or living in their parents' basement, playing COD for their entire life. These Antifa and BLM people, especially the ones who jumped on the bandwagon yesterday, she has in quotes, because they became woke, insert eye roll here, she has in parentheses, do not deserve a second glance or thought from us. Our little pinky toenails have more character, morals, and ethics than these punks have in their entire body. So somehow an investigation or someone exposed that, speaking of transparency. How do you respond to that? That is someone who is wearing the same uniform that you have.
And is a commander.
And is a commander.
Yeah. Yeah. If you listen to that person's narrative, you consistently hear them, they, and here we go back to the us
Of,
against them.
mhm.
And that is an ingrained philosophy that goes back to the police culture. Us
Mhm.
against them. We have to protect us because of them. And it's unfortunate, but it gets ingrained in people's brain. Then they begin to devalue other people's lives. And then also, especially for Black males, then you become demonized. You don't feel pain. You have to crack their head open or they don't understand. I knew police officers say you cannot talk to Black people unless you're cursing at them. They don't understand anything else but profanity. That's it. So they've already made up in their mind that in some way you are substandard to them, us against
Wow.
them. I think that major was suspended or something,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
rightfully
She
so.
retired.
Well, that's
Hmm.
a good move. That's a good move. But look at the power and influence that that person had if it was only on one person. And I say that, and not to jump too far ahead, but I went to what they call the International Association Chiefs of Police Conference on ethics in law enforcement. This was in the late 90s, I guess.
Hmm.
And something was revealed to me then that I never forgot. And they called it the 15-15-70 rule. And what that meant was in every major police department, 15% of that department is going to be honest all the time.
Hmm.
15% of that department is going to be dishonest much of the time, being it lying on police reports, planting evidence, drugs, weapons, what have you. But what
Wow.
really got me even more was that 70% could go either way, depending on who's watching them or who trained them. So if we're going to look at, say, the 15% that are doing the wrong thing,
Yeah.
1,000-person department, 150 officers, 24 hours a day, 3 or 4 various shifts, planting drugs, lying on police reports, violating civil rights, violating the Constitution. How long do you think that community is going to say, you know what? We have no faith in our police because they treat us, it's us against them mentality. And then when we do engage with them, they're doing the wrong thing. Now, again, don't get me wrong, it's not all the police, but that's a significant amount, and the impact is horrific.
Wow. So I know that you said that you would win the Nobel Peace Prize if you had the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
We are where we are. We know what the chants are. Um, where do you think we go from here? And what are some ideas about how to get there?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Dr. Ledbetter, I think that much of this has to do with accountability, and it
Yeah.
also has to do with rebuilding that relationship between the police and the communities we serve.
Yeah.
That should be job one. Or whether you work in an urban, rural, university environment, it shouldn't matter. Your goal every day should be to improve that relationship and to find out the heartbeat of your community. So for me, change is going to happen by rebuilding that relationship. It's
Yeah.
going to build for those 4 points you mentioned, the
Yeah.
accountability and transparency, and to get rid of the bias. The bias is one of the biggest challenges because it's very easy as a police officer because you deal with so many various situations that are pretty horrific sometimes. You know, you're
Hmm.
dealing with violence, you're seeing drug abuse, homelessness, violence against domestic abuse, child abuse. You're seeing things that no one should ever see, and it impacts you. But if
Yeah.
you become so jaded by that that you no longer have any faith in humanity, or you look at a
Hmm.
certain ethnicity as being somehow subhuman,
Mm.
when I got promoted to sergeant with St. Louis City, I had about 5 years on, which gladly for me, that was kind of unusual to get promoted at that young of an age, but I was fortunate.
Yeah.
And I went to a
No, you earned
district.
it.
Well, thank you, doctor. I went to a district that 99% Black. No
Hmm.
problem here. No problem. So one of my colleagues who was a white sergeant who had got promoted, he said, well, Keith, where you going? I told him. He said, you going to work there? You going to that, I'll just say a feces hole, even though he used a different term. And at the
What?
time, that's where my in-laws lived. And I'm like, Now, if you see this community as a feces
Wow.
bowl, how do we treat feces? We flush it. Nobody wants to hold it in their hands. I don't want to get too graphic, but
That's
no one
okay.
wants to be around it. You want to get rid of it. You want to move it on somewhere, and that's how they treat the community.
So I think that's part of the challenge, right? So when you're talking about defunding, that is what people are talking about. And so I think when um, I honestly think that the community is struggling right now with how to upend, how to root that evil, these insidious, this vitriolic, uh, venomous, this hatred, this bias. How do you get rid of that? Or are we just like decades from that? Because we're not willing to break it down, dismantle the system, and build it up from the ground. How are we going to stop what's happening now? I don't know that's an impossible answer, but it's. I wonder if we talk about the relationships. Can you give me one example of how, based on all your experience, what a community, what a set of officers can do right now to build relationship in the community that they're in?
Well,
Because
to
we've
be
got to
honest,
start talking, I
we
think.
do. We do. And that's critical. I think we have to change the perception of what police officers are, how we are perceived, and what our role is in a community. Our role is not to be some type of a military unit that comes in and squashes oppression with the boots and the tanks and the, armored weapons. And, I mean, sometimes force is a part of the job sometimes, but it's not all the time. And you have to build relationships. I would much rather attempt to diffuse a situation by communication than to whip out my impact weapon or whip out my taser or jump into some stance and be prepared to use some empty hand control. I'd rather spend extra time talking, trying to get to the root cause. Look, what's going on? That's why
Okay.
I'm a believer in that tactical communication. We've gotten away from a lot of the things that we've started off doing well. Now,
I
some
see.
officers still do it, but often it's easier just to go in and lay a stick. When I first started in police work, it was commonplace that if you were dealing with an individual who was resisting your control,
Mm.
resisting your arrest, your only option was what they said was to give them a turban, which meant to crack their head open. Anything short of that, you're playing with the person.
Oh my.
So I was the type of person, told you going in, I like defensive tactics, how I do joint holds, manipulations, pressure points. I'm not trying to have to break your head open or break your arm or break your leg. I'm just going
Mm.
to control you, get you in handcuffs, get to the station and do what we got to do. But if my whole first move is just to crack your head open, and then the other officers are wondering, what are you doing? Many officer, what are you doing? Stop playing with him. Stop doing that strikes to the leg or trying to get him in a control. Just crack his head open, man. Give him a turban.
Oh
Okay, if I heard
gosh.
it once, I heard it again. Now, this was years ago. Don't get me wrong, but I would be hard pressed not to believe that there are people out here looking to give folks turbans,
I think
unfortunately.
I think
And
that's
then they
right.
would say, what are you doing with that little nightstick? Go get you a table leg. You need you a big table leg with a hunk of iron on the end of it. And then that's what you use. That's your weapon of choice. So I was always somewhat frustrated because I knew it had to be a better way. I just
Mm-hmm.
knew it had to be a better way. But these were individuals. Let's see, if I came on in the 80s, these were individuals who had been around since the 50s and 60s, who were
Do
trained by people who had been trained from the 40s and the 30s. So they
goodness
brought that
gracious.
culture with them and passed it on.
And thus the system. Do you believe
That's
that
what they
racist
did.
cops could be changed?
Woo, that's a rough one. I think anyone under the right circumstances can be
Okay.
changed. What I have
That's the
seen
researcher
change,
in you.
well, yeah, yeah, you're true. What I have seen that changed police officers' behavior is a few things. Training, yes, that can happen. Second, attrition. That changed because you're gone. But third, financial. When you start taxing these officers, pension, you start making them responsible for lawsuit settlements, that behavior changes almost overnight because no police
Oh.
officer is in this business to lose money. Not at all. And if you're telling me you're gonna we used to say put a rock on my check, 50% of my
Oh.
check, I think I better change. I'm going to change because wifey at home is not going to be happy. I got 2 kids going to college. What am I going to do? I think I better reassess my priorities. So those are the 3 things that I have seen through the years that have
Hmm.
changed police officers' behavior. But do we have to wait for attrition? I have to wait for a guy to go through 20, 30 years and then retire
Mm-mm.
before changes? No. And we
No.
have to start with the young officers. Recruitment. Recruitment is very important. A lot of places, they would go to racist communities to extract individuals to become policemen because they fit the mold of the police officer they're looking for.
Wow.
So they just bring it right on in. Come on, you're one of us. Come on, let's go. I mean, I'm talking
Wow.
about traveling to the deep south, looking
Wow.
for these. Oh, that's where we're recruiting in Duck Hill, Mississippi today, folks. That's where we're going, as an example. But
Nutbush.
yeah, but you know, it's just a
Wow.
reality. So recruitment, retention, and discipline. Discipline has not been fair. I mean, I know this is not really the venue to get
Yeah.
into that, but just to be honest with you, when you look at discipline between black officers and white officers, oftentimes there's a gulf, which is the same for the judicial system. So even though I'm hard on police officers, I cannot be soft on the court system. I can be
Mm.
cannot be soft on
Right.
correction. I
Right.
cannot be soft on probation and parole because
Mhm.
every one of those elements have issues. We are just
Yeah.
the first part of a rung, but
Right.
it goes much deeper than that.
I've
And I
heard you
think,
say that.
yeah, and we have to be astute and we have to be willing to do what's necessary. Oftentimes, it's easier not to do what's necessary. Just let it go. Let it go. And
Yeah.
we have to get away from that.
Yeah, I've heard you say, you can defund the police, but that's not going to do anything because you've got a whole criminal justice system and law enforcement system that needs to be overhauled. It's not just about the police, but this is what we look at because this is what we're presented with. The entire system needs an overhaul.
Absolutely. I believe that.
So, yeah, yeah. So I'm going to just allow you to have a parting word. I could talk all day about these issues because you're just a good conversation. But we've been talking about an hour now. Can you believe that? It's funny how time flies.
Wow.
We've been having fun.
That's
So
right.
what would you like to leave with your um, how about why don't you leave something for Western community? For the
Okay.
students at Western, what would you like them to know?
Well, for the students at Western, I would just ask that you
Mm,
give us a chance. Don't judge us on the behaviors of others.
mm,
Allow us an opportunity to show us who you are, which is as much as I'm sure our community would say the same thing. Don't judge us because I'm Black,
mhm,
BIPOC, however the scenario plays out. Give me an opportunity to show you who we are. But when we look at racism, when we look at white supremacy, when we look at all of these terrible scenarios, it does not feed into a positive narrative. So for the Western students, all I ask is give us a chance. Talk to the officers,
hmm,
challenge them, and see if they are up to the task, because then you will know and you will see for yourself. Watch how we do the things we do. I'm a big believer in renewable energy. So when I saw that they had a renewable energy team here at the university and they were in Red Square, I was right in the middle of it. Hey, what are you doing? How are we doing? What are you going to do? Because I said, this might be an opportunity. I wouldn't mind getting up on a Saturday for a few hours to help build a
oh, I
tiny
love that.
home or
I love
something
that.
like that, or solar power. That's great. And I think I have other officers who would do the
Mhm,
same thing because it's that type of engagement as human beings. And also keep in mind here at Western, even though you see us in the uniform, we're also public safety. We're dealing with the fire, making sure evacuations are moving smooth. If there's an
that's right.
earthquake, if there's a disaster, a pandemic, we are here with you to support your survival and to provide resources to help you to stay safe. So for the Western community, I would just ask to give us a chance to show you what good policing is, give you a chance to learn. If you have questions about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, ask us. That's how you know. Don't just rely solely on what you get in social media. Give us an opportunity to show you who we are. to talk to us. And I think if you do that, you'll be pleasantly surprised. And that's what I would encourage you to do.
All right. Nice little bow. You wrapped it up so nicely. Thank you so
Thank you.
much, Assistant Chief Keith Williams of Western Washington University's Public Safety and University Police Department. I am so grateful that you took time to share space with me today and not only share your story, but share some ideas about solutions that the greater society can absolutely take advantage of, but also you took some time to also speak to our Western students. So I'm really grateful for that. So thank you so much. And I
Thank you.
hope that you'll come back.
Absolutely. We're in it to the bitter end, per
All
se.
right. I'll take it. I'll take it.
All right.
Take
Thank you,
care.
Doctor. I
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.